Ticouac's Cosmic Journey, an original tale by Éric Doirot. The Universal Awakening. Our story begins a long time ago, in the distant past, when the universe was still very young and not as big and infinite as it is today. In those distant times, when time itself had a completely different measure, the universe was essentially composed of emptiness and already extended over dizzying distances, encompassing everything that existed. At all times and in all places, the universe had always been a great mystery, and no one or anything had ever been able to discover, guess, or imagine any part of its secret. One fine morning, something wonderful happened. But it was not a morning like any other, because there had never been a morning where this happened in the universe. This event occurred in a totally unknown corner of space, without anyone or anything expecting, guessing, or imagining it. In that beautiful morning was born a friendly being, who was characterized by his small size. He was much smaller than anything we could have imagined in such a vast universe. He was so small that one might wonder if anything was really there. The closer you got to him to try to catch a glimpse, the less you could see. He was invisible to everyone, but he was there, in the midst of that immensity, tiny. What was he doing? Apparently not much, almost nothing at all, except to exist and wake up on that beautiful morning, in that part of the universe where there had never been a morning. This little being felt good, or rather, he didn't feel at all. He was comfortably settled at the bottom of himself and was looking at the vast space in front of him. The scenery was fabulous, and he immediately liked it. He saw the universe wrapped in its huge black and silent cloak. In its infinite cloak, infinitely great, infinitely black, infinitely empty, infinitely infinite. He saw this space and felt good, content to have made it there. He remained motionless for a long time. Then he moved, and the whole universe moved with him. The ground universe loved movement, and the little thing, which was not annoying, moved again and again. And the universe, in turn, moved again and again. Our friend continued to play and look at the infinite space that lay peacefully before his eyes and all around him for a long time. But did he actually have eyes? They were not needed in this large, empty and dark space. He had no eyes, no nose, no mouth, no ears, no arms, no hands, no feet, because he didn't need any of that. Not yet. He spun slowly, and the whole universe slowly spun around him to follow him in this game of movement. Was it the universe that revolved around him? Or was it our friend who had this impression when, in truth, the universe was still motionless? If there had been a few stars, he would have seen them moving on the black canvas of outer space. But there was not a single light, curtain, or wrinkle. Just an unfathomable and mysterious void. The little being decided to spin faster. He could choose to spin and move at whatever speed he wanted. He could see the universe and play with it, so he felt deep inside himself that he existed, a small consciousness in the middle of an infinite and benevolent universe. After several billion years, he stopped spinning and remained motionless and quiet for another several billion years. Then he coughed. It sounded dry and funny, like a hiccup, like a little quack. This sound surprised the ground universe, which was used to silence. But as this sound could be heard over and over again, he got used to this new presence. As all things and beings must have a name in the universe, our friend was called Ticouac because of his hiccup. The first light. Several billion years went by before a glow, no bigger than a pinhole, gently appeared on the black canvas of outer space. Our friend looked at the bright spot carefully and for a long time, because he had never seen anything like it before. His curiosity was aroused. The small glow was of a shiny blue, and although it was very distant, Ticouac had the impression that it was getting bigger. For a moment he felt like he could touch it, but as he started to move, the light passed by him at full speed and continued its course away from him on the opposite side. Ticouac turned around as quickly as he could to follow this strange and incredibly fast phenomenon. The tiny light continued its mad journey, but it had changed color. It had gone from bright blue to pale pink. The glow soon vanished in the unfathomable darkness of space. Ticouac spent several billion years looking in the direction where the strange shiny visitor had disappeared. He then decided to look again in the direction where the phenomenon had appeared, bright and bluish. To his delight, he saw another bright spot, then another, and another, then a bluish swarm. In the depths of space, born from darkness, had sprung an incredible number of blue and bright lights. Although they all seemed to be motionless, they were moving and getting closer at an amazing speed. A second later, an uninterrupted downpour of light fell from all sides to Ticouac's satisfaction, who, under the spell, invented a melody composed of sounds filled with surprise and amazement. However, as no noise can be diffused in the void, the dots of light did not pay attention to our tiny friend or to his song, passing from one side to the other without even noticing him. A dot that was shinier and more sensitive than the others caught him mid-air and dragged him along. The ground universe suddenly froze, and there were now small holes of light, motionless and white, in place of the thousands of stars that have moved at full speed. Without knowing it, Ticouac was traveling at the speed of light, and as everyone was moving at the same speed, everyone seemed motionless. This was a strange phenomenon that much later man would call relativity. But Ticouac didn't know that. Not yet. Next to him, the friendly light that had invited him on the journey looked gently in his direction. It was really brighter than all the others. On closer inspection, you could even see the intense shade of white of his body changing. Light white, intense white, bluish white. They traveled for a long time and over unimaginable distances, sending signs of friendship and kindness to each other. Then our friend coughed, and the little light changed color. He giggled, and the little light began to vibrate slightly. That's how they began to communicate and talk to each other. It was not easy at first, but after several million years, they could understand each other. "Hello," Ticouac began. "Light you," replied the light. She had a lovely accent, and her colorful vibrations made the shape of her body dance. Ticouac asked, "What's your name?" "Light me," replied the light. "Who are you?" "I am the first light. My sisters and I are fulfilling our great destiny." All around them, there were thousands of bright specks following the conversation and vibrating cheerfully as one. Ticouac was surprised. "Your destiny?" "We all have a destiny, you know. Ours was born of light all, the first burst of light." Our friend was listening carefully. "At the birth of the ground universe," Light Me continued, "it was still very dark. Alone, Light All shone with 1,000 lights. Suddenly, he burst into billions of light particles." Ticouac imagined a giant ball of light exploding into a firework display spreading throughout the ground universe. He dreamed and wondered if he too could give birth to billions of Ticouacs. This idea made him smile because he knew that it was too small and that it must be very difficult. Light Me continued, "As you see, we are the specks of light that once made up Light All. We are pursuing his dream, the extraordinary dream he had in his heart, the dream of shining light on space and emerging worlds." This wonderful story and brilliant revelations brought new emotions and sensations to our little friend. Light Me added, "What we discover at any given moment far exceeds what Light All had hoped for. There are so many wonders, mysteries, and treasures." Ticouac could feel in his heart a space and universe that was longing to be enlightened and awakened. A universe perhaps larger and more incredible than the ground universe itself, but it was still too small to understand it. Light All had been the first light of the ground universe, once blindingly bright. In billions of billions of billions of billions of years, it would almost disappear and become an invisible, fossilized light. Ticouac traveled long distances with the Light Me, and the longer the journey progressed, the more he sensed that these luminous beings tended to distance themselves from each other. One day, the Light Sisters sent multicolored wings to each other before disappearing into the darkness of space. Soon the two friends were alone, while the last light specks disappeared one by one. The immensity that lay before them belonged to the lightsmith, the universe explorers. It was time to say goodbye. Ticouac and Lightme looked at each other one last time, feeling a gentle warmth in their hearts that made them feel good. They knew they would meet again one day. Ticouac slowed down his pace and waved goodbye to his friend, who instantly disappeared into the darkness of the universe. The invisible forces. Ticouac was now floating in space and was gently swayed by the imperceptible and invisible currents that surrounded him. Most of the time, he looked in front of him, or rather, around him, because he could see and feel from all sides at the same time. But this did not prevent him from indulging in his favorite activity when he wanted to, spinning on himself. One day, he felt something unusual, like invisible little fingers that tickled him and tried to lead him in a particular direction. At first, he tried to escape this strange attraction. But quickly, intuitively, he let himself be guided. Since he liked being tickled, he concluded that it was good for him. The sensation he felt at any given moment made him giggle with pleasure, and although he had never had a mouth, he laughed wholeheartedly. He had the pleasant feeling that he was going down a slide that swerved to one side, to the other, descended at full speed, went up, and then made loops and spirals. He had a lot of fun and couldn't help but scream in the most delicious moments when he felt like he was falling into the void. Hundreds of echoes replied to him from all sides. They expressed the same emotions of joy and pleasure. Ticouac knew that it was not the echo of his own voice, but that these were exclamations from other beings who were also being dragged on the back of this space merry-go-round. In the ground universe enlightened by the lightsmith, mysterious forces were in motion, and the cosmic slides were the most fascinating of all. They had an incredible power of attraction. A child would have compared this attraction to the irresistible and uncontrollable craving you feel for a beautiful chocolate cake. From a distance, this curious phenomenon resembled a huge spiraling cloud with many branches that extended to infinity. Ticouac happily slid on a long trail of steam, where, on both sides, fingers tickled him as he passed. He laughed a lot. All around, many echo beings were now having fun and letting themselves be drawn into a destiny they did not know yet. At this point, the universe was not empty, and this strange vapor was made of tiny specks floating towards each other. All this matter must have felt isolated in this vast space to be attracted by each other. This powerful desire for closeness finally gave rise to this giant spiral of smoke. Ticouac saw an echo being. He was shaped like a speck of dust and spun around laughing, which made him think he was playing his favorite game. Another speck of dust appeared and swirled around the first one before sticking to it. This unexpected couple was now spinning strangely in a good mood, letting out exclamations of joy. Ticouac observed the two specks while they were having fun. They were inseparable and were no longer two distinct particles, only one double particle. Around them, other groups had formed, groups of 2, 3, 4, 5, and more specks. Their shapes and colors were different because they changed as soon as they touched each other. In this part of interstellar space, where there was only emptiness, a huge cloud had formed made up of remarkably different particles and groups of particles of matter. Ticouac had not yet grasped the sheer size of this great cosmic ballet. But he knew, deep down, that this light, which extended over millions of kilometers, must have had its purpose. This idea had come to him from the very first moment of his life. Rather what he thought were the very first moment, when he realized that he didn't need eyes to see, a mouth to talk, or ears to listen. He didn't have to be visible either to exist. Around him, the specks were playing at joining together into more and more complex shapes. Some groups looked like snowflakes, others like kites, others like shapeless packages. It only took Ticouac a few cosmic seconds to reach the center of the spiral that men in the distant future would call galaxy. The place was quiet and pleasant, and everything seemed to be in harmony. Here, billions of matter particles found a balance between the desire to get closer and the tendency to move away. Flashes of light appeared like fireworks. They were everywhere. Some were close and looked like white balls, and others, further away, burst into sparkles. On all sides of this cosmic ballet, bright light bulbs lit up space and decorated the slide like the multicolored garlands of the magnificent Christmas tree. Ticouac took a break to enjoy the show and warm up for a moment under the light source of these thousands of emergent stars. The heart of the stars. Ticouac was very young in the universe, but he was already several billion years old, and many transformations had taken place in him. It was difficult to imagine what was really happening in the heart of the stars when you looked at those spheres glittering in the sky. Ticouac figured it out easily because he already knew it, and perhaps even knew it all along. The hearts of the stars were bright and pulsated in an explosion. Focusing on himself, he was crumbling under tremendous pressure. He was the furnace that created new materials, the starting point for billions of possibilities. There were meetings in the hearts of the stars that couldn't be missed. Material wouldn't be able to come together and compose new shapes otherwise. The hearts of the stars were in opposition to what existed outside. The universe was infinite, while the heart had its limit, since we could guess its outline shaped like a glowing ball. The universe was cold, extremely cold, while the heart was hot, extremely hot, to the point that everything that existed would melt in it. The universe was black, dark, devoid of light, while the heart was filled with light that completely covered the spectrum of visible and invisible colors. There was also a new light that was born in the heart of the stars, young and lively, brighter than the light's me, and just as curious about the universe and its secrets. The heart of the stars was unique and multiple at the same time. They were surprisingly radiant and creative, and there were billions of them in the universe. Incredible quantities of elementary particles were assembled in these large cosmic melting pots and tirelessly transformed into more complex materials that would give rise, in the near and distant future, to much more amazing life and creations. Within the grand universe, invisible forces were at work, engaged in a construction that went beyond the imagination. An image appeared in our friend's mind, a sun-star that had given birth to a group of planets, one of which seemed to be a blue diamond, resting on top of space's black jewel case. The singing of whales. The silence was interrupted by a languid song, which tickled Ticouac's senses and caught his attention. Coming from afar, this roaring high-pitched harmony would have reminded us of the whale's song, if they had existed. Ticouac imagined a huge shape that looked like a heavy fish, with an elegant dorsal fin, moving in the infinite ocean of the universe. New, more distant melodies caressed the nimble mind of our little friend as he imagined a whole group of marine mammals swimming from star to star. These strange animals majestically went down thousands galactic slides, brushing against distant suns that were like oases of light in the darkness of space. Ticouac was convinced that these beings existed somewhere, and if not in the void of space, then it must have been in a liquid ocean where they could move gracefully. The singing continued, and Ticouac recognized whistling sounds. After he had made his first impression, he could see reality beyond his imagination. He now saw a huge plume made of water and ice, which looked like long hair spread over hundreds of thousands of kilometers. The immaculate whiteness of this sparkling plume was illuminated by the nascent lights of the stars that were playing with the abundant hair. The languid song sounded like a muffled rumble, accompanied by mixed sounds in which one could distinguish water flows, suction sounds, crashes, crackles, and explosions. The immense plume took on the appearance of a rainbow with 1,000 unexpected colors, while the being to whom this magnificent hair belonged remained invisible. Ticouac was curious by nature and wanted to get closer to this mysterious phenomenon so he could get a better look at its beauty. A simple effort is all it took to make an incredible jump and instantly get close to it. Enchanted by his achievement, he bathed for a few moments in an improvised waterfall where each drop of water turned into clouds of colorful steam as soon as it appeared. Ticouac thought that he could enjoy the show even better if he had eyes. Suddenly, thin, transparent slits appeared on his skin, and a new light entered his mind that he didn't know existed. He was amazed and delighted with his new vision. The galactic beauty of this liquid falling from the sky filled him with admiration. A voice whispered, "Shh, shh." Ticouac let out a gasp of amazement, and the voice turned into an harmonious laugh, whose ripples reminded us of the graceful flow of a beautiful waterfall. is tickling me, the voice said. Ticouac thought that if he had ears, he would better enjoy the supple and pleasant intonations of this mysterious voice. Immediately, hearing shells grew and complimented his countless eyes. Shh. How do you like our universe? Shh. Whack. Our friend was surprised by the sound of his name. His ears were definitely giving him unexpected sensations. Do you know me? Asked Ticouac. He jumped at the sound of his own voice, each word taking the path to his new ears to tickle his mind. I am a great traveler, and little lights have told me a lot about you, the voice added. Ticouac discovered that despite the vastness of the grand universe, beings knew each other and often crossed paths during their long journeys. The grand universe, too. Knows you. How can you know me? I'm so tiny. We can be small outside and big inside. With his new eyes, Ticouac sought the origin of this enigmatic and beautiful voice in the liquid splendor. Your hair is so beautiful and dazzling. I am the gushing spring that gives birth to my golden hair. Look harder and you'll see. The multicolored water and steam droplets spread apart and formed a passage. A large anthracite ball appeared, deep and shimmering with 1,000 sparkles. Slight vibrations every microsecond made its surface undulate, from which jets of water and white steam escaped. Ticouac was surprised by this apparition, which, beyond its dark beauty, differed from what he had seen before. I pictured you differently, said Ticouac. I'm just as you imagined and dreamed of me. What your new eyes reflect is only the appearance of my being. The voice said. Ticouac closed his eyes, and his imagination restored the image of the majestic white whale whose smooth skin seemed extremely soft. Much like your small size is the appearance of the being you really are. What mysterious words, Ticouac thought, as if the secrets of the universe could only be expressed with these enigmatic words. The being you really are. At every moment, I am consumed with delight as I travel through the infinite space of our beautiful universe. Each of my visits is an opportunity for the words to enjoy my knowledge and the precious material I carry. Our little friend was amazed by the importance of this black lady with her silver and colorful panache. She was the sower, the one who fertilizes the great universe and brings the essential and necessary elements to life. Ticouac felt that she was not the only one doing this task, and that many great cetaceans from her imagination were traveling through space. Have you seen the wonders that my seed fertilized, hidden in the heart of these colorful words? Ticouac didn't need to answer, because the great comet already knew all the answers. He accepted the invitation to travel, and they both dove into the infinite space, which had never been empty, but full of fabulous treasures. They crossed swirls of stars, admired incredible colors, distant worlds that were visible and invisible, and explored uncharted territory. They brushed against the sun, shining exceptional warmth and projecting tongues of fire at impressive distances. They lingered in front of large galactic paintings, where animals that did not yet exist were drawn. Someday, they would have their place in one of the billions of words. After a time which felt both very long and very short, the great comet gradually lost its panache to become a big black ball thrown at full speed. It became invisible to those who could only look with their eyes, but it continued its course, a black object on a black background. Gently leaning on the smooth skin of the comet whale, our little friend saw a set of familiar lines grow bigger and bigger. At the center, there was a large bright yellow ball and small mirrored balls dancing all around, forming a miniature cosmic ballet. Among these swirling spheres of different sizes and colors, one was surrounded by a small halo of atmosphere with blue reflections. Ticouac thanked the comet through his thoughts for the wonderful journey they had made together, and then fell towards the blue diamond resting on top of space's black jewel case. The great white whale waved with its fin before continuing its journey, invisible and silent in the infinite universe. The Blue Planet. Each birth was unique. This began with wandering materials whose origins were varied, passing through the solar system. Some came from distant times when light all had burst into billions of lights me. Others came from distant galactic slides that spun too fast on their axes and ejected hundreds of billions of particles. Others had traveled with white whales, deeply buried inside their black heads before being spread by the plumes of water vapor. All these particles were quietly floating and looking at each other. They knew and recognized each other because they belonged to a common future. This belief encouraged them to come closer together, driven by an invisible force that helped form galaxies, solar systems, planets, and worlds. Each one, as tiny or as big as a grain of sand, had its own identity, its own role to play in the formation of a gigantic black and gray cloud floating in space. The densest part of the cloud formed a bright sun-shaped sphere, while balls of matter gathered around it to form planets. This solar system was under construction. It was small on the scale of the universe, but large on the scale of the beings and animals that would populate it, revolving in perfect balance. Ticouac was sliding toward the sparkling planetary system. How old was it? For our friend, who appeared since time immemorial, it appeared young, but it was several billion years old and had already consumed half of his stellar life.
Time is very strange,
Ticouac thought.
A second here seems like an eternity there.
Each planet was unique in shape, size, and color. There were several orange-yellow balls, an elegant spinning top with a collar, large gray stones, an imposing glowing mass of gas, small white spheres, and finally, the blue diamond that Ticouac had seen in his mind. It was the brightness of the sun, whose rays reflected off the surface of the planets that gave them their colors. The reflections were red and yellow when they were covered with sand. The reflections were pale and milky when they were immersed in a thick atmosphere. The reflections were blue and white when they contained water. There was a lot of water on the small blue planet to which Ticouac was heading, but strangely enough, the creatures who lived there called it Earth. The show was great. The blue of the oceans that covered it completely reflected the sun's rays, igniting the thin atmosphere and creating cascades of colors in the sky. He moved closer until he touched the layer that protected this world from the cosmic and cold rays coming from the universe. Billions of transparent particles waved as they held hands above the surface and seemed to be waiting for something to happen. Ticouac joined them and waited. Several million years passed, but he wasn't bored because the planet kept on changing. There were thousands of sunrises and sunsets that were a delight to his eyes. Mysterious sea currents roamed the primitive oceans, and fearsome atmospheric outbursts projected gigantic flashes of lightning from large gray and black clouds. One fine morning, vast solid areas appeared here and there on the oceans, while large immaculate and icy blocks formed at both sides of the planet. New smells were now floating in the atmosphere. Gases were forming that would soon allow living beings to breathe. The primitive man. As the days passed, the areas that emerged from the waters turned into islands and continents and soon turned green with vegetation, while tiny animals of all species evolved peacefully. In the vast oceans, whales swam gracefully, reminding Ticouac of his long ride on the comet's back. Among the countless animals that populated this world, a new species appeared. Compared to the others, it looked very weak and helpless. The skin of these beings was naked and delicate, sometimes covered with furs to protect themselves from the cold. They lived in groups and hid at night in large holes in the mountains, and, surprisingly, they walked upright on their two hind legs. Ticouac, who was fascinated by these primitive men, waited for hundreds and thousands of sunrises and sunsets to see them evolve until the day. It happened one evening when the sun's rays were glowing and still warming the atmosphere. All the men had disappeared into their open cave at the edge of the mountain. Ticouac recognized the rising glimmer of the fire that had various uses: give warmth, light, and keep away the wild animals that sometimes came close during the long nights. He noticed a silhouette on the rock and then a human form. A child was standing at the entrance of the cave. He was almost naked, with skin covering his hips. He walked hesitantly, stopping to observe the surroundings, the forest and rocks that could hide predators. Then his attention turned to the setting sun, the red and orange clouds, and finally to the dark sky where the first stars were being lit one by one. The child's gaze was a deep blue in which the clouds were reflected. The center of his eye was pure black, like the center of space. The stars were shining there, and for a moment Ticouac thought he saw his own image. The child made a small sign as an invitation and then disappeared into the cave. Our friend never left an invitation unanswered and descended from his layer of transparent atmosphere. He reached the exact place where the little boy had stood and entered the mountain. He snuck near the fire which Chloe had seen and around which were gathered 4 high silhouettes that guarded the entrance. The atmosphere was warm, much warmer than outside, where the coolness had settled. Orderly sounds caught Ticouac's attention, made up of growls and whispers that served as a language between these beings. They talked about hunting, running in the forest, women and children. Deep inside the belly of the mountain, Ticouac saw other, smaller fires around which other human forms were grouped and gesturing. In each of these yellow and orange fires that his multiple eyes looked at with fascination, he still felt the power of the incandescent fire of the stars, in which the particles of matter continued their transformation to better serve the projects of the grand universe. Among the sounds, growls and tapping, he could hear a chorus of voices whose sweetness composed the first songs of this emerging humanity. At first, these voices were a simple combination of sounds to communicate during happy or unhappy moments of life, but they would soon become complex symphonies, full of emotions. Hands were moving against a large wall with irregular shapes to create colorful symbols. Fluids of different color were arranged in the hollows of the stones, red with animal blood, green with plants, ochre with crushed stones. Men dipped their fingers in it and impregnated them with colors. They stroked the rock face to apply their handprints, lines, dots, shapes of men and animals, and symbols to celebrate the moment. Later, under other skies and in other places, these primitive signs would become writing, books, memory, inventions, creations, paintings, sculptures. All were evidence of the endless imagination the grand universe expressed through its creatures. Ticouac could feel the heartbeat of these men, women, and children who had taken refuge in the depths of the earth. Deep, regular beats, the signature and music of the human race. On a layer of foliage, skins and furs, a woman was lying down. The double beat in her chest was that of two hearts, one of the mother and the other of an infant about to see the light of day. The memory of the people. Ticouac moved closer to this fertile belly to better listen to the magical echo of a life full of hope. The baby was comfortably resting with its head facing down, bathed in its nourishing liquid. For several weeks, he had perceived the outside world, mixed with gargles and voices, punctuated by the reassuring beat of his mother's heart. Ticouac was floating next to the baby and shared his thoughts and questions. A few moments earlier, this human being still looked like a tadpole, then the appearance of arms and legs had definitely transformed him. His imminent arrival in the world would be the birth of his word. A memory was engraved in his genes, in the depths of the complex assembly of these cells built over the course of human history. Images were formed, which Ticouac observed: a primitive, deep and dark ocean, microorganisms, plankton, shrimp, fish, hunting animals, and cetaceans. People crawled on the muddy ground. Legs grew under them, allowing them to conquer this new space. From rodents, they became primates and then Homo sapiens. Their hands could caress, their eyes could be affectionate, and the warmth of their bodies comforted the new minds. Fire, hunting, carved stones, and the invention of tools had transformed the life of this species that was still hidden in the depths of the mountain. This prolific sequence lasted only a few moments for our friend, but represented the entire history of these human beings. A shadow in the night. A veil of intense darkness clouded the baby's mind and caused his heart rate to accelerate. Threatening shapes appeared from his ancestral memory, immense, crude, and howling. Deep in the depths of space, a disturbing stain lurked around and defied the darkness of the universe. No one knew when it appeared. The watchmen were guarding the entrance to the cave, revived the fire, and seized the long sticks they used to protect themselves. Outside, the stones, rocks, and shade of the trees became worrying, as if a wild beast was hiding, his approach sowing anxiety in the spirit of nature. The wind almost smothered the protective fire, which resisted. The warriors tightened up their ranks. Things became heated, and although the threat was not yet identified, fear gripped these primitive beings. Ticouac quietly watched this agitation. His vision of this world was so perfect that he immediately identified the invisible causes of these young people's anguish. A storm rose over the ocean, and strong winds blew spray in the distance that drove many animals away into the forest, while several light years away, an unimaginable black hole of power swallowed everything in its path. A monstrous mass whose dimension exceeded those of the slides sucked all the matter floating around it into its gaping mouth, waiting to devour the universe itself. The handful of warriors gesticulated more and more, growling and snarling. Their feet went back and forth in a kind of dance. Their hands and arms held and wielded spears towards an invisible enemy, hidden in the shadows and outside. Women and children huddled at the bottom of the cave, curled up and silent, fearing the arrival of a wild beast, or worse. From the shadow of the rock, an old man stepped forward. He had survived 40 winters and as many summers on his own, an exceptionally long life compared to that of many adults. He approached the women and looked at them gently. His movements were slow and kind, so the children calmed down and resumed their games. A smile appeared on his hairy and primitive face. His eyes had already observed so many things that he knew that sometimes the wind that rises over the forest seems frightening. The women touched his hands, then he walked towards the men who were guarding the entrance. They exchanged some grunts. The sticks bowed as the old man led the warriors out. The invigorating and salty wind became softer and caressed their faces. The rustle of the leaves had not stopped, but it no longer seemed as threatening in the minds of those still frightened and ignorant. Ticouac looked at them with compassion as the mysterious black hole at the bottom of the space continued his absorbing endeavor. Soon he would move away and disappear. From one universe to the other, human hearts were beating with the great universe, with star pulsations, with words that were being born or disappearing, from the simplest to the most complex of elements. Every second of the universe, Ticouac felt space slowly contracting on itself and expanding rapidly. However, each billionth of a second was billions of years for the beings and creatures that lived within it. A little overwhelmed by this realization, Ticouac dived entirely into an inner universe that he had always been aware of, but had never found its entrance. He traveled there for an infinite time, covering immeasurable distances and meeting many worlds, beings, and things beyond the imagination. Ticouac was so tiny that no one had ever really seen him before. The words, things, and beings he had met could only feel, recognize, and love him. Unseen, he was the one who was everywhere without existing, dreaming, imagining, and conceiving the possibilities of the grand universe. In the middle of it all, he was once again comfortably settled deep inside himself and contemplated the spaces populated by extraordinary and unimaginable things. Then he moved, and the whole universe moved. Epilogue. One fine morning, as there are billions of them in the universe, a little child was born every second on the small blue planet, which was a diamond resting on the black box of space. Of course, it wasn't very tall. What was it doing? Apparently not much, almost nothing at all, except to exist and wake up on this beautiful morning, in this part of the universe. He was looking in front of him. He liked the sight very much. The sun was on the horizon, and its first rays lit up the sky. The newborn felt good to have arrived there. The fire of the stars burned in his eyes, and in the darkness of his pupils, an invisible reflection illuminated his mind and his dreams with 1,000 sparks.